Hello and welcome back to the fourth lecture in the International Business Management course. Today, in today's lecture, we will go over the political and legal systems in national environments that will impact your ability to internationalize your business. For today's lecture, we will cover or we will describe the political and legal environments in international business. We will understand the political systems, the different political systems. We will go over the different legal systems, describe the participants involved in the political and legal systems. We will also identify the major country risk that could be produced by political systems, and we will know how to manage the country risk that could arise from the differences in the political and legal environments. So let's start. First, before we get into the actual points related to the country risk, let's recap what we have covered so far. What we have covered so far in the course is that when we are thinking of internationalizing, we have to analyze certain environments. Last lecture, if you guys remember, we covered the cross-cultural environment and how understanding the differences in social and cultural elements is very important and vital for businesses when they think of internationalizing. And today we will cover the second type of environment, which is the political and legal environment that could also have a vital impact on the ability for businesses to internationalize. In other words, to simplify, when I as a domestic or a local business think of internationalizing, I have to take into consideration the differences in the political and legal environments in the foreign country which I am trying to enter. Why? Because if I don't do this, I could encounter or I could fall under the country risk. So what exactly is the country risk? It is the exposure to potential loss or major effects on the company operations and profitability caused by the changes or the developments in a country from its political or legal system or environment. Also, it is very close to political risk. So the country risk is divided into two: political risk and the risk that arises from the changes or the movements that happen in the legal system. So each country has unique political and legal environment that often pose challenges for company performances, because any company thinking of entering a foreign market, they have to keep up with the changes that are constantly happening in their in that foreign market's legal system, or they have to keep up with the political status of that country, and they have to analyze if this country is considered as a politically stable or unstable market. And you will see here in the book that they give you an example of Coca-Cola and how Coca-Cola, as a major global brand, they fell in Germany when they are operating in Germany. They encountered a country risk due to the fact that the German government enabled them or required them to start a recycling plan. And these new laws required consumers to return the non-reusable soft drink containers to stores for a refund of 0.25 euros. And this, instead of adapting and coping with this change, most of the retailers, they actually didn't want to adapt to this change, and big supermarket chains started pulling out Coca-Cola from their shelves because they felt like they were a hassle to maintain. So therefore, understanding such changes, from whether they are from laws or political movements, we have to definitely take them into consideration, because as we have witnessed with such a global brand such as Coca-Cola, they fell under this risk even though they are a global brand that have huge leverage in the market and experience and so on. So no brand or no company is big enough to avoid falling under the political or being impacted by political and legal risks. So therefore, these are the dimensions which we will cover as a country risk dimensions. We will take the following points in details. So to start off, let's discuss the theoretical elements of political and legal systems. When we are talking about a political system, what is meant by political systems? Usually, political systems can be simply defined as a formal institution that constitutes a government. So usually politics is related to the government in any nation. It includes legislative bodies, political parties, lobbying groups such as the parliament and so on, and trade unions. The systems also defines how these groups interact with each other. This is what a political system is basically made of. Now, three major types of political systems that you should know when you are studying or when you are becoming and when thinking of internationalizing or engaging in any international transactions are as following. Usually, any country falls under one of these or multiple of these systems. We have the authoritarianism, which is a type of political system. We have socialism and we have democracy. And later on in this lecture, we will take what each political system means exactly. Okay, moving on. Before we get into the different types, let's talk about the functions of a political system. Why does any nation have to have a well-defined political system? Because usually political systems exist for the purpose of providing protection from external threats. So they are almost like a way of being proactive to avoid falling into any threats. They ensure stability based on laws, so they are a source of backup or a kind of support based on legal laws. They govern the allocation of valued resources among the members of society, so they clarify and they make certain elements very transparent. Also, they define how society's members interact with each other. So it's almost like a guideline or a blueprint to how people should act or behave in certain situations. So political and legal systems are, when we are talking about the legal systems, they are defined as the system for interpreting and enforcing laws. Now, the political system is usually, the legal system is usually highly influenced by the political systems. When we witness political instability, you will find that it impacts the legal systems as well, where usually with a new government or a new regime comes different laws and regulations and so on. And this is why they are interconnected. So the legal systems, as we were just defining, they are the laws or the regulations and rules established norms for conduct. So it's almost like the code of conduct which I will be following, and these are the rules and regulations that I must abide to or I must follow. Now, when we are talking about legal systems, they differ from country to country. Usually the legal systems are comprised into four different types. We have the common law, we have the civil law, we have religious law, and some nations, they have mixed systems, and we will also go over the different types of laws later on. Okay. So moving back to the political systems, as I was discussing earlier, usually the political systems, they impact the laws. So what are the different types of political systems that we have? Number one is authoritarianism. Authoritarianism comes from the word authority. Here, in a nation that follows this type of political system, usually the government controls all economic and political matters. So when we are talking about government intervention, in such a political system here, the government has massive control over the economies. Therefore, it's also known as a very strict economy. So this makes it very difficult for businesses to operate or to enter such markets or such countries because they are so highly restricted from foreign entries. So the government controls all economic and political matters. They are either theocratic or they are secular, which means that they are not religious-based. Also, in such political systems, a state of party is led by a dictator. So there's usually, it's also known as a dictatorship economy. Power is usually sustained via secret police or propaganda, regulation of free discussion and criticism. So usually here, as I was saying earlier, it's a very strict market, or it's a very strict economy. Basically, entry is very difficult because the government controls almost all operations. And some examples of this political system in some countries in the Middle East and Africa are Cuba and North Korea. They are still following this political system. And this political system, you will rarely find it nowadays. It still does exist, but it's very rare to find. Now, the second political system we will get into, but first let's talk about the sources of country risk. So as we were discussing in the beginning, we have to highly analyze and understand and study the foreign market which we are trying to enter, and analyze their political system and the laws and the regulations and so on, so we don't fall into the country risk. So what are the risks that could arise? When we are talking about the political system, some risk that could arise is from the government. If the government keeps changing from time to time, this can cause huge instability in the political system, in the political environment, and this causes disturbance in operations and in the way businesses can operate and enter foreign markets. So therefore, the political parties, the legislative bodies, the lobbying groups, the trade unions, all of these political institutions have a major impact on the political stability. So any changes or disturbance in one of these components, they could highly impact and cause political threats or political instability in a nation. Also, when we're talking about the legal system, and we said that these two are very related to one another and they are basically rely on one another, is that if the political system, as we said, there's instability, you will definitely find also instability in legal systems, where laws and regulation and rules, they start to change, and this change causes difficulties in ensuring order in commercial activities, in your ability to resolve disputes, your ability to protect intellectual property, and the changes in tax economic output could also cause disturbance, or it could cause instability in that foreign market due to its legal system or due to its unstable legal system. So let's go back to the political systems. The second type is socialism. Now, socialism, it's a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates or elaborates production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or registered by the community as a whole. So here the government does interfere, but to a certain extent. Now, it's usually here in socialism, it's some industries could be controlled by the government, while others are free for private sector to tackle or to interfere in, or to be operated by the private sector. So here, capital is vested in the state, and it is used primarily as a means of production for use rather than for profit. So here the main focus is the welfare of the citizens of this nation. As you will find in the next point, where it says the group welfare outweighs the individual welfare, and this is why the main focus is not on profit as much as on the economic and advances of the population's welfare. The government's role here is to control the basic means of production, distribution, and commercial activity. So they will interfere as a source of, or a mediator to controlling this process. Socialism occurs in much of the world as a type of social democracy, mainly in Western Europe, Brazil, and India. And in such political system, the government intervention is usually in the private sector, and the corporate income tax refers are higher, and this is also to control and to monitor the private sector. The third and last political system is democracy. I think we are all familiar with democracy since it is it's where economic activity occurs freely as per market forces. Now here, the government intervention is usually very limited. The government performs only essential functions such as legal authority to serve all citizens, such as national defense, maintaining law and order, foreign relations, and providing basic infrastructure, or a basic, as we said before, a legal system that should be followed and abided by the different private sectors. Private property rights here, it's definitely taken into consideration, and it is secured and well protected. The ability to own property and assets, to increase one's asset base by accumulating the private wealth, and property here includes land, buildings, stocks, contracts, patents, and this encourages initiative and ambition and innovation. So usually in a democratic political system, this enhances or this promotes the concept of internationalization. So if I'm thinking of entering a foreign market, entering a democratic foreign market is definitely a lot easier for businesses striving to internationalize. But there's also one disadvantage, which means that since I'm entering in such a free market with minimum restrictions, this means that the level of competitors that I will have to deal with is a lot higher. Even though this could be a threat, or this could be kind of difficult for some businesses, it definitely enhances the overall welfare, because as we know, higher competition equals higher quality and better quality of products and services for the customers or the consumers of this market. And here you will find different examples of the three different political systems. You will find different countries that operate or that follow the three different political systems. We have the democratic, the socialism, and so on. You will find the different countries as listed in front of you. Okay, so as we were just discussing, when we were talking about democracy and how this provides openness when entering a foreign market, it says that democracy is associated with openness. In other words, it's the lack of regulation and barriers to the entry of firms in foreign markets. Now, we have to take into consideration that this openness is associated with multiple points, such as it makes it very easy to successfully enter this foreign market. It increases market demand. It also increases and improves the competition due to, as we were just saying, competition on quality, and this improves the overall product quality because every business or every company is trying to prove itself in this market and to maintain their market share. So they do this through continuous product development, whether it is in quality or innovation and so on. And this causes increased competition, leading to efficiencies and lower prices. This is why I was saying this is very beneficial for consumers, because they gain better quality products for cheaper prices in such a competitive market. You will find an example here given about democracy and openness. In the Indian market, you will see that as they have steadily lowered barriers in the car market or in the automotive market, the foreign car makers entered the market easily. This created an increasing the number of models for sale. This caused greater competition, and therefore it increased the quality of available cars for lower and more affordable prices. Okay, let's go back, or let's summarize the political and economic systems. As we discussed earlier, we have covered three different political and economic systems. We have authoritarianism, which is associated with command economies, where the government here controls and makes all the decisions on what and how to produce certain products. Democracy, which is associated with market economies and capitalism, and openness, as we said earlier, in which decisions are largely fit to market forces, that is supply and demand. And then we have socialism, which could be known as mixed economies, which have features of both market and command economies. Command means operated or driven by the government, combining state intervention or government intervention and market mechanism. And here we have Sweden and Singapore, which are very well known to have a socialism political system. So who are the actors in the political and legal system? Obviously, the most obvious actor is the government. The government is the main participant in the political and legal system, and this is the main head or the main participant, as I just said, that impacts the public sector. They operate on a national and local level, so the government controls their nation. So while I'm entering such a foreign market, I have to definitely study the political and legal system in terms of the government that is in charge. The international organizations such as the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the United Nations, which highly impact the political and legal systems when we are talking about international transactions. We have the regional trade organizations such as the European Union and many other types. We have the special interest groups such as the labor unions and environmental advocates, which also impact the political and legal systems, and the local competing firms which oppose foreign firms, or also known as the competition that we have to take into consideration. Okay, so what is the country risk that could be produced by these different political systems? Usually, as we said, as the government is the main participant in the country or the political system of any organization, or of any market, what can the government do? The government could definitely interfere in multiple ways. One way that the government could interfere is that they could take over the corporate assets, and this is something that might seem a bit exaggerated, but this does happen in multiple nations. So the government could take over corporate assets in multiple ways. Usually they are categorized into three different ways. One is confiscation. Confiscation is where the government interferes or takes over the corporate assets without any compensation given to the company or the organization. Another way that the government could interfere is through something called expropriation. Now, expropriation is also where the government takes over an organization's assets, but here they give some sort of compensation in return. Another way that governments could interfere is through something called nationalization. Also, nationalization is when a government interferes or takes over an entire industry with or without compensation. And usually nationalization is done for the interest of the nation. And this is why it's called nationalization, because this is the government usually does this for the nation's interest, and this is what this is basically the alibi that they use to cover their movement of doing such harmful impact. So examples is, for example, Venezuela, where ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips were forced to abandon their multi-billion-dollar investment in the local oil industry, where the government overtook their business. And there's multiple examples of the government doing this, and usually this is for sometimes it's due to political and it's due to economic reasons, and we will understand why. So the country risk produced by the political systems also could come in forms of embargoes or sanctions. And what this means is that the government may respond to offensive activities for foreign countries by imposing embargoes and sanctions. Even though this might seem unethical, but this is something that does happen a lot, where the government would reply, or we'll say react to a certain political dispute with one country by punishing the multinationals or the organizations that are operated in their country, that are operated in that foreign market, which are owned by these countries that they are having a dispute with. So the government would respond by, for example, posing certain sanctions where they ban international trade with these countries and the multinationals that come from these countries. So usually they are undertaken by a country or group of countries against another who is judged to have jeopardized peace and security. Another way that they can do this is by embargoes, which are also bans on exports and imports that forbid trade in specific goods in specific countries. And an example of this is the US, when they enforced embargoes against Cuba, Iran, and North Korea, labeled as a state sponsored of terrorism. So because they are having disputes with these nations, they banned all trade transactions with them. And they said that this is for the own good of the nation, because they are having issues with these countries, so it's best to cut them off and not engage in any trade transactions with them. Also, another country risk that could be produced by political systems is boycotts against firms and nations. And boycotts are usually done by the citizens of a certain nation. They are a voluntary refusal to engage in commercial dealings with a nation or a company. And some recent examples of this was done in France, where citizens boycotted, or they striked and they cut off any transactions with Disneyland Paris to express opposition to globalization and takeover of French farmland, where Disneyland acquired a huge land in order to operate the Disneyland facilities in this land, and this was highly not agreed upon by the French citizens, and therefore they reacted by boycotting the French Disneyland, or the Disneyland that is in Paris. Other country risks that are produced by political systems, and I think these are obvious, which is war and insurrection, terrorism, and some terrorism is actually sponsored by national governments, and this is the politics of things, and this is why it's very important to understand the political environment and the politics of certain nations, because it has been proven, or history has proven, that some terrorism is definitely triggered or initiated by the government, and these are elements that we have to take into consideration and understand the history of such acts to not fall under such risks when entering foreign markets. So what are the type of country risk produced by legal systems? We have the foreign investment laws. We have controls on operating forms and practices, the marketing and distribution laws, the laws regarding income repatriation, which means that when people they work in foreign countries and they want to bring money back to their home country, there's certain laws that restrict this for economic reasons. There's environmental laws, contract laws, internet and e-commerce regulations, and inadequate or underdeveloped legal systems that we all, as an international business or as a business trying to internationalize, we definitely have to take into consideration. In order to manage these country risks, we have to be proactive. How can businesses become proactive? Usually the main source of being proactive is, and this is something that we will actually cover in details in lecture 6, But being proactive is done through scanning the different environments. As we have been covering throughout this course, we have to do our research. We have to evaluate the different surrounding environments in a way that is very in-depth and that is very in details in order to ensure that we don't fall in any of these risks. So doing your research and doing your planning process is very important and tactical in order to manage risks that could arise from internationalization. Therefore, let's summarize the final of this lecture. When we are thinking of internationalizing, as we discussed, we have to ensure that we study the political and legal environment very well of the foreign market which we are trying to enter. Every nation has its own political and legal environment that differs from one country to another, and this is why it's very important to go in details and study these environments very detailed to ensure that we don't fall under these risks, to understand the different political systems, different laws, and the different regulations that are imposed in this foreign market. This is highly a prerequisite to succeeding in any international or to enter any international market. Thank you and see you in the next lecture.